This episode is brought to you by Fuli Gemstones.
The Venetian actually didn't love diamonds, especially. They much more prefer color stones. And in color stones, they much more prefer the red stones. The red stones for the Venetian, probably for the link with the Roman Empire, red is the color of this city in a certain way, were the very favorite stones for the Venetians.
I'm Carol Woolton, the voice of jewellery. Welcome to If Jewels Could Talk. I'm an author and broadcaster, and the woman who initiated the role of jewellery editor at magazines like Tatler and Vogue. This is a podcast for everyone, for people who do like jewellery, for people who don't realise they like jewellery, and anyone intrigued by fascinating facts, new ideas and forgotten histories. So join me as I tell sparkly tales and meet all sorts of people, delving into 4 centuries of jewellery culture and investigate what's happening now. I am delighted to be in Venice today, and I have 2 guests. My first guest is Stephen Moore. He's an antiquary, TV presenter and raconteur. His 500,000 followers tune in on Instagram to see his reports, interesting gossip and knowledge, which is filmed around his home on the Grand Canal, and he's a writer and author. Stephen, thank you for joining us this morning.
Pleasure, very nice to be asked.
And we are at Nardi, and I'm with Alberto Nardi, the 3rd generation jeweller whose store has resided on the corner of St. Mark's Square since the 1920s. If you hear a little music in the background, it's because we're a stone's throw from Florian, the famous cafe where they play music all day. And this is where the jet set have met for generations. Elizabeth Taylor, Grace Kelly, Ernest Hemingway, Spanish and Greek royal family. Everybody makes a little homage to Nardi when they're in Venice. And their designs have often been inspired by the city itself, the architecture, motifs, light, water, festivals, characters, art and culture, and the work of the 18th century Venetian goldsmiths. Alberto, thank you very much for hosting us this morning.
Great pleasure to be with you, and it's a great pleasure to have this possibility to talk about us. Thank you.
Stephen, I wanted to know how Venice played a pivotal role in establishing a global gemstone market, mainly through trade. Did this start during the Renaissance?
Well, before that, really, we talk a lot today about, superhighways and roads and things. Well, we had an amazing superhighway. It was called the Silk Road. Mm-hmm. And the Silk Road travelled all the way from China to Turkey, as it is now, or Turkey. And then, of course, the link to Europe was Venice. So whether Venice was raiding Constantinople or vice versa, but the link was right the way from China all the way to Venice through Constantinople, and that brought in silk, it brought in porcelain, brought in gold, it brought in jewels. And I don't need to tell you, Carol, that all the jewelry that came from Afghanistan, from India, that all came on the spice roads as well. So it all ended up in Venice, and of course Venice has always been this cultural crossroads. So when you get trade, you get wealth, and that means you get great ancestors of Alberto's setting up as goldsmiths and making incredible jewellery, because Venice, as it still is a bit, is a place you can show off without shame.
So Venice really was a sort of cultural melting pot. It wasn't just gemstones, spice, fabric, but ideas.
Absolutely,
and
yes.
People meeting and exchanging their different...
The Venetians were very clever. If you had an idea, they would pay you money for it and give you a monopoly on it. So you could come to Venice and say, I have this new way of smelting gold, for instance. They say, great, we think this is fabulous. Here's some money, here's a house, here's a patent on it. So they were attracting wealth in the same way as modern economies trying to do now. Nothing is new. Venice had already done it.
And it's still, Alberto, do you think it still remains this centre of cultural interaction?
Of course, I don't want to be negative, but of course, these fantastic atmospheres that we had in the past, in terms of being such a great merchant, in a certain way disappear. The city of Venice right now, it is a beautiful stage, of course, and what we do now is showing our beauty in a certain way. But what I always say that we need, to produce culture, we need to produce, business once again in a little, of course, version, but that will be a very important issue. At that time, as Stephen said, currently Venice was a center where we produced business, we produced ideas. The Venetian merchant, where we were talking about stones, for example, Marco Polo was from a family of stone dealers. We have a report of a Venetian jeweler in the 16th century were traveling to Burma or to China or to India to buy stones and coming back, this Silk Road was very important for us as a Venetian, So in a certain way, as a Venetian merchant, as I consider myself, it's a little bit a pity that we are just, here selling, touristic stuff, and we are not the kind of entrepreneur that we were in the past.
Except, Alberto, we're sitting here in the midst of the Venice Film Festival, where Kate Blanchett was on my flight, just drop a little name in there, and that is all happening down at the Lido. I was at the Homo Faber exhibition yesterday, which is encouraging artisans and craftsmanship, and there were objects, incredible pieces, not just of jewellery, of furniture, of art, from people all around the world, all around the globe. And then last night I went to Diane von Furstenberg's awards honouring women. Oprah Winfrey was there presenting awards. There's a lot happening, a lot of people coming to the city to do things. That must make...
I quite agree. That there's a very nice international set of people who live here. And I always think, I can say as a non-Venetian, and Alberto can maybe say I'm wrong, but as a non-Venetian, as a Venetian by adoption, Venice has never been that good at selling itself. It's been very good at selling Venice, but never that good at selling itself as a place. And I think we all know where the problems lie. The people who run Venice aren't that, they're very happy to have the day-to-day tourists in, where really in the past Venice was always, when I first came here in the 90s, the place was full. There was a beautiful, you remember the shirt shop in Calle Vallaressa, beautiful shirt shop, so 3 bays long, and all they had was the bales of shirting. And I saw that shop and I said to myself, one day I will be able to afford to buy a shirt in that shop. And the damn shop's closed down. So I'll never be able to have a shirt there.
So these Venetian skills are pushed out.
Yes. So and I only found out last year, until last summer, the same guy was in Mestre making shirts. And that's what a lot of things have happened. People have moved out of Venice because they can sell their property better as an Airbnb. And that is in many ways damaging Venice. But
damaging a lot of cities. Look at the people in Barcelona.
I think there's still hope for Venice because I think Venice's beauty in some ways is self-healing. And I think it will heal again.
Yeah, this is a concept that is very interesting because the beauty of Venice is the issue. Venice is so unique and so beautiful. This is the force of the city of Venice, but in a certain way, it is also the drama of the city of Venice. As a Venetian, I always say that I'm very happy to have new Venetian, as Stephen. It is very important to have this international crowd that decide to spend a lot of time in my city. And for me, being a Venetian is not just to be born here, but is to decide to move here. So, what we really need is to have new Venetians. So, what I can say, to everybody that listen this podcast is the fact that if somebody would like to come here, they are very and most welcome because, this city needs new citizens, new Venetians.
Well, we had Michelle Lamy, married to Rick Owens, on the podcast recently, and they bought a house in the Lido. So it seems to be attracting a lot of big fashion names, theatrical names, which has to be pretty exciting. And
his party was the party of the Biennale, but I went to bed, I'm afraid.
So when you talked about it's a good place to kind of show off, I wonder when this was the centre of this gemstone trading. It was pretty important for Renaissance women to be highly bejewelled, wasn't it?
Completely, but of course they had sumptuary laws, so unless you were in the Golden Book, as it was, which is like kind of the upper echelon of society, you were allowed to wear silks and velvets and jewellery. If you weren't in the Golden Book, you couldn't.
So what was the Golden Book?
The Golden Book was a bit like, if you imagine, the ultimate Debrett's Guide, or Who's Who, but it was the elite of society, so they were the patrician families, the title families, and then there was the Silver Book, was kind of the mercantile families. And unless you were in the Golden Book, for instance, you couldn't become a senator, you couldn't vote, and you couldn't become involved in politics. You couldn't have a title. So things like, people name their palazzos after themselves. So like, Palazzo Barbaro is Palazzo Barbaro Curtis, because the Curtis family used to own it all. So, but in the Venetian Republic, unless you're in the Golden Book, you couldn't name the palazzo after yourself. You'd have to live in somebody else's palazzo.
That's interesting.
But then you could pay to join the book, of course. So
backhanders.
Yeah, but then there's other strange things, like you were allowed to wear second-hand clothes. So, of course, in Renaissance, Venice was famous for its prostitutes. So they could wear silks and velvets as long as they were second-hand. And that all ended up because the youngest daughter of a noble family would often end up going into a convent as a nun, and her dowry would be her amazing clothes. So all the silk and velvet clothes would go to the convent, and they would sell the best ones, which ended up with prostitutes, which is a bit ironic. And the rest would be reordered into vestments or things for the altar. So a lot of fragments of very important Venetian textiles survive because they went into convents.
The circular economy.
Exactly. Recycling.
But the sumptuary laws in Venice, for anyone who doesn't know, was that the ostentatious display of wealth had caused great concern for the government, so they brought this in because they thought it might incite envy and problems between the classes. But no one stuck to it, really, did they?
No, I mean, it was similar to the law about painting your gondola black, because most people forget a gondola was like a car.
Yes.
So if you were well off, you had your own gondola and you employed two gondoliers, because, of course, they originally had two. But people used to decorate their gondolas quite extravagantly, so again, they brought in a law to make them black.
Because they were super colourful, they were outdoing each other.
So in many ways, Venice, it was always a republic, it was always very proud of being a republic. Mm-hmm. And anybody, I think there was a couple of doges who tried to make into a hereditary monarchy, and they were dispatched. Because also, the flip side of Venice is that whilst it was very egalitarian, they could be quite brutal as well, couldn't they?
Now, Venice was, as Cicerone said once, was in a certain way an ideal kind of state, because it was a mixed way between a monarchy, a republic, but also had had a very strong form of oligarchy. So, all these different components were inside the Venetian Republic. So Venice was not such an old, noble aristocratic republic as Napoleon thought. I much more prefer, the British or the American version, seeing the Venetian Republic, that they consider it in a certain way a sort of inspiration, also for the American Republic one was established. I would like just to link with what Stephen say, and for what I know, in 16th century and also 15th century was very popular also renting jewelry, and the people that could not afford, in buying jewelry, especially, pearls that they were very on fashion in Venice, but also, of course, in England, and they were very costly. They could rent for a special occasion, for a special ball. It was a very florid business.
Really? That's very nice. I didn't know that.
Well, it's the same as George IV when he was coronated.
Yes.
He rented all the jewellery on his crown.
Yes.
So it's so in the Tower of London they have this crown frame which has no jewellery in it because all the stones were sent back to Rundle Bridge and Rundle or wherever they came from. So
it wasn't until Queen Victoria that they basically could keep the stones in the crown. Well, so all the paintings that we see of during the Renaissance period are these women wearing beautiful head adornments, pendants, intaglios. So some of those might have been rented for the painting.
Yeah, you never know.
You never know.
They had a stall as you went into Mr. Tiepolo's. It's sort of...
And actually, when you were talking about the merchant who, as they would go off adventuring, I mean, there is a story of, I think it was the Balbiani family.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's who you were talking about, who created a syndicate. And in 1591, a group of the merchant entrepreneurs went to a joint venture to India in search of spice and stones. And they brought back apparently over 7,000 gems in one shipment. So the amount of gemstones coming into Venice must have been
we have to
enormous.
consider, and also it's a story that the majority of Venetian they don't know. I mean, and it's funny enough that Venice was a very important cutting center, for precious stones and also for diamonds. This is this sort of controversy, but I mean, as a Venetian, I say that there is no doubt about that. That the first brilliant cut. Of course, not the contemporary cut that we are used to see now, but it was developed by a Venetian cutter called Hortensio Borgis, and also, some Venetian cutter they were used, in India for cutting, many big stones for the Grand Mogul. So, Venice was a very important center for cutting, especially in the area of Rialto, not in the area of San Marco. This business went on since the end of 17th century. Then, of course, being, the merchant routes, and especially, with the discovery of the big mines in Brazil and then in Africa, of course, of diamonds, this kind of business completely finished. What is important to say, once again, is that the Venetian actually didn't love diamonds, especially. They much more prefer color stones. And in color stones, they much more prefer the red stones. The red stones for the Venetian, probably for the link with the Roman Empire, red is the color of this city in a certain way, were the very favorite stones for the Venetians.
So it would be ruby, garnet.
Yeah, I had the chance to make a study of the stones of the Pala d'Oro, that is this very important element in the church of San Marco, that is covered of thousands of stones. Unfortunately, the majority of stones that were stolen by our friend Napoleon when he came to Venice, and they were replaced with some copies, glass, stuff like that in 19th century, but you can immediately detach, the original stones. And the majority of stones, as I said before, they are sapphires, emeralds, and they call ruby, but some of them are garnets. They were not the gemological knowledge at that time to divide, stones as we do now.
When you talk about some of the stones being replaced by glass, I guess the fact that you had Murano there making this spectacular glass, and some of it, which I looked at yesterday, in certain lights could look like a diamond, be very easy for them to commit fraud and be swapping in the glass for the stones.
Yeah, Alberto, did you know did they make fake stones on Murano? They must have done, really.
No, I know that the municipality of Venice in 19th century, I don't know exactly, they replaced, these stones that were stolen. And as I said before, for me, it was very easy to detach them because they are faceted stones. So some of these stones are, semi-precious stones. Mm. Others are probably glass, but there is not such a big difference between the two. And, Venice in 19th century lived some very poor moment. The city was quite poor because, we lost the fact to be the major harbor in the North Adriatic Sea because it became Trieste, that was under the Austrian, So Venice was living quite a difficult and tough moment, but the Venetian, they wanted to replace this color, and impact in this Pala d'Oro, and so they replaced with stones. Of course, for me as a gemologist, it's quite easy to detach a piece of glass and precious stones. But also we have to consider that during the Byzantine time, when the Pala d'Oro was made, the stones were just, bold stone. They are not faceted, they are sort of cabochon, they were left like that. There are stones that, up to me as a jeweler, They are full of intrinsic appeal, atmospheres that, just the time is giving them.
Did they make any glass stones on Murano in the sort of 17th and 18th century? I'm thinking of the glass pearls that they made. So surely they must have made
it is funny
fake rubies and things as well.
Sure.
No, fake rubies, I don't know. There is all this story of these stones called avventurine, aventurine, and also the murrine, this kind of workmanship. That they were, it's funny to say, they were sold by Venetian merchant to some African tribes, and they were sold by the African to some Europe. They were in incredible, kind of way that these materials were done. But this selling of this kind of glass beads and stuff like that were very florid, during the 19th century.
You see, I'm thinking of things like the Calcedonia glass, which was imitating chalcedony. So surely if they were doing that, they must have tried to imitate other jewellery as well for the jewellery trade.
There've always been imitations of precious stones.
But I think
the Egyptians, faience. It's always happened.
We've just never detected them. They're out there somewhere. But
and also at the time when we're talking about during them, nobody would have been a gemologist. They were not gemologists. So people were basically looking at texts like Pliny, the Roman historian, to get their information about stones and minerals, weren't they?
That's true. And also, the stones that were important for the color, The study that we did with this professor of Byzantine art was to try to understand if in the Palla d'Oro there were a theological meaning in the stone that they were set, So the colors were linked, with the cross, with the death of Christ and stuff like that. And probably it was like that, the people of the Middle Age, they were always using, these theological, issues and bringing, theological issues, also in small piece of art as it is not such a small, but in object of art as it is the Palla d'Oro.
And of course the city itself, as you've said, is just so inspiring. And it did begin very early on to inspire jewellery design. Stephen, the Neff pendant was quite an example of that, wasn't it?
Sort of a ship pendant.
Yes, because it became such a sort of maritime power. And the life on the sea, the fact you were just surrounded by water, did that begin to inspire design itself?
I think it must have done, because what we have to remember is that, today we're used to a multicultural society, and seeing people of different races or creeds or whatever to yourself is quite normal and everyday. But many places weren't like that. So if you came to Venice 500 years ago, you would see people of all nations, all creeds, all colours, and Venice was quite an egalitarian society. There was no... The Venetians would look at somebody and think, oh, they wouldn't think he's black. They'd think, can I make some money from that man? Where's he from? He's from somewhere abroad. What can he sell us? So they looked at people in a completely different way. So to be in that space with all these, shall we say, exotic, for want of a better word, all these exotic people, and also in a place as beautiful as Venice, and as you said, the water, it's the light that the water reflects. So everywhere you look, it's like you've been lit by the best Hollywood lighting cameraman. So that must have inspired people in the same way it inspired artists in the 19th and 20th century. Once they got here, they just, the famous story about Monet, who said, Venice was too beautiful to paint. But once he'd been here a few days, he was completely blown away by it and just started painting and painting. And then we have all those amazing Monet paintings of Venice. So jewellery designers must have been inspired.
Yes. Well, I think the small metal ships that became very fashionable, bejewelled, enamelled, was a sort of speciality. And I think also they were worn probably as a good luck to the sailors on the water. So I think that became quite a fashion. But it has been for your family in the past. The city has really inspired your design, hasn't it, Alberto?
Yeah, I was thinking when you talk about this sheep, earrings. They are very beautiful. That in a certain way, I don't want to appear arrogant, but I mean, I did something, a cultural discovery in a certain way, because, it was a couple of years ago, I saw in a private collection in a museum in Milano, some of these mask rings that they were very popular in Venice, but also in France in 18th century. And I thought that they were very beautiful, and this tradition, as the sheep earrings tradition, completely disappeared in the city of Venice. So I thought that it would be very nice to bring it back, So what we are trying to do, what I'm trying to do is also cultural effort, to bring back, some things that is very linked with our tradition, and in a certain way, unfortunately, completely disappear. Now, these mask earrings are in production in our shop. I'm very happy about that. They are very...
So traditional Venetian masks.
Yeah.
And they're created in what gemstones?
No, they have an incredible work of enamel, where we reproduce, a face, a classical face of a man or a woman of 18th century, It's completely hand painted, There is a long work behind them. When I started to work on them, we were very borderline between doing something that was very kitsch, and something that was a piece of art. In our kind of business, we are always like that, The result at the end, up to me, is quite nice, and for what I'm seeing, the people
it's
like...
It's a bit understated, isn't it? It's quite nice.
Well, I think I should maybe say...
We'll show them on the... You can all judge that they're
fabulous.
They're very smart. But I think that when you say carnival mask to people, they think of all the horrible cheap masks you get down by the Giardino.
No,
These are proper 18th century masks. They're not...
Stephen, can I ask you quickly, the history of the mask, was that from disease and plague, and that people were covering themselves?
No, it was from Carnevale, which went on
Carnevale.
for almost 6 months in Venice. And for all, Venice was a very stratified society with, very, the aristocracy at the top and right down to the peasants and the prostitutes and everything. During Carnevale, as long as you wore a mask, you could do almost anything you wanted. So there was a handful of proper masks. So there was the Bauta, which is the kind of the one you'll see if you've seen the Amadeus. It's that one. There's the is it Muetta, the one that the woman hold, or a domino, the ball they hold in their mouth. So of course it covers their mouth, but they can't speak. And then there was even there was a mask which was a cat, which was called the Naga, which gay people could wear. And as long as they wore the Naga mask and they wore the opposite sex clothes, they could do what they wanted. So a gay man could wear the Naga mask and a dress and have sex with another gay man wearing the dress, and nothing was done. However, it wasn't Carnevale, and you did that, you'd be burnt in between the columns, which is why today gay Venetians will not walk between the columns.
Really?
Yeah.
That's a bit of history we didn't know.
The Carnevale was a way of attracting people, and it wasn't. To come to Venice in the Renaissance, you weren't poor. You had to be rich to come here because you had to come in a ship. So you had to have a ship. So even the hotel, which is now in Cadamosta, Venice, was the Liane Bianco, which was Europe's first hotel. And that went back to the 16th century. So Venice invented things like hotels because there were all these people coming to stay, unless you knew someone, so they created this hotel where you could just go and book a room. But it wasn't like a travel lodge. These were quite well-off people, and they were attracted by the fact that you could do naughty things, shall we say. But when they came here to do their naughty things, they were buying jewellery, they were buying spices, they were buying silks and velvets. So it was a way of attracting rich people, tempting them in with, ooh la la, and they spent the money.
I don't know why, I always imagined, I suppose because of COVID and masks we wore in COVID, I imagined that somehow masks were also linked to the plague.
Well, there's the plague doctor mask, which is like with the bird's beak.
Right.
But that was kind of supposedly that they put herbs and things down the beak.
A pomander.
Yes, indeed.
Like a pomander.
So it is. That is one of the other traditional masks as well. I mean, the whole of we're just next to Cafe Florian, which kind of is the epicenter of Carnivale now. But what people forget is the modern Carnivale was reinvented in, was it 76 or 78?
Yeah, Carnival was reinvented by some young Venetian when I was an adolescent. I'm talking about the 70s, 80s, because Carnival was completely disappeared. It became a very popular and funny kind of huge party. I remember that I danced in the middle of San Marco Square, There was a huge disco, with, 20,000 people,
Going back to the design, I've seen some amazing chandeliers here that were inspired by the Santa Maria della Salute church.
Yeah, that one are, once again, many of our pieces are inspired directly or indirectly to the city of Venice. That one, they have a quite interesting story because I started to design them during the COVID, the lockdown period, that affected everybody. And, the Basilica della Salute, but Stephen can tell us much more about that, was established by the Venetian in the 17th century as a sort of a prayer for the end of a big plague that's affected all Europe, especially Venice, and where the half of the Venetian population died, and also the Doge died, So as a prayer, as an ex voto, the Venetians say, if this big disease will finish, we will establish the most beautiful church for the Holy Mary, and so, the legends say that the plague finished and they built this beautiful church. So during the lockdown, I thought it was very interesting to have this link, and to make, something that was resembling, the Basilica as a sort of a prayer for all of us, for the end of the COVID.
What you said is quite interesting because it just shows, as we were saying at the beginning, nothing is new. The plague, we had a new plague, and maybe when you're talking about the tourist elements of Venice, it was ever thus, Stephen.
It's interesting. I was here a week before the lockdown, and then I was here when we went into sort of the red zone over Christmas one time. And part of me wishes I was trapped in Venice, because it must have been amazing to have seen it with just the 40-something thousand Venetians left. And I remember Venetian friends telling me, it's wonderful, Venice has become back a village, we just see our neighbours, it's so... But then bit by bit, they suddenly realise, actually, with just these 48,000 people, Venice is no longer sustainable, and actually it is the tourists that really keep Venice going. But it was always the same, and it is interesting that the plagues, which COVID wasn't exactly like the bubonic plague, but the solution. You have a.
Didn't Henry James complain about the crowds?
Oh yes, and the cheap baubles in the shops. But I'd love to see the cheap baubles Henry James was looking at.
Yes. Didn't he? He was painting to try and keep those traditions. He was worried about the traditions.
But you see, Carol, people forget Canaletto. They were basically very fancy postcards. Canaletto had a sketchbook which is still, I think, is it in the Accademia or it's in one of the local collections. And basically, you went through this sketchbook and you said, "We like Queen Mary. We like that. We like that. Can we have one of those? But can we have it bigger?" And Consul Smith, who was the British consul and was his de facto agent, that's the reason there's so many amazing Canalettos in British collections, because if he hadn't have taken them up, he was just a kind of... His father was a painter, but his father was a painter of just Venetian scenes. Again, when I first came here in the 90s, you used to see little Venetian scenes and shops which were, not the descendants, but the spiritual descendants of Canaletto. So we look at an amazing Canaletto today, But in reality, it was kind of a postcard if you were on a grand tour.
And he was a bit like Alberto, wasn't he, in lamenting the end of real Venetian customs, traditions, vistas, and was trying to preserve them.
And that was almost 300 years ago, yes.
Yes.
But you have another lovely connection, which I know you're too shy to talk about, but maybe you will. The icon of the Madonna della Salute, you have a personal connection to that.
No, I mean, talking about the Madonna della Salute, you know, I had a great privilege that unfortunately was, I mean, I have a little bit of complaint because it was not so well known by the Venetian and by everybody, I would like to say, because we were living, you know, the months after the lockdown, you know. I had the privilege that I did, you know, I designed, you know, the two new crowns, you know, for this icon that is at the center of the Basilica della Salute. At the center of the Basilica della Salute, there is a Greek icon that was in Candia, you know, that was one of these Greek islands under the Venetian, you know, and came to Venice, you know, in 17th century. And it is an icon that brings good luck, you know, and protect the city of Venice. So in 1922 was after the big Spanish flu and, you know, the First World War and everything, a Venetian jeweler designed a first, you know, corredo we called. So, I mean, crowns and some jewels just to make this icon very beautiful during, you know, the days of La Madonna della Salute that are in November. You know, in 2022, you know, the bishop asked me to make a new crown, you know, two new crowns for this icon. And what I did, I studied, you know, I made a sort of, you know, of value of all the ex voto, you know, all these jewels that, you know, the people, you know, give to for free, of course, they live in the altar, you know, of the Basilica della Salute. So, I mean, I didn't know that, you know, the church said that you can convert, you know, this ex voto, you know, made in gold, you know, in something that is used for the same purpose. You know, the church, I mean, generally speaking, they can't sell, you know, this kind of items. So, I mean, I made a study of the value that is quite huge of all the gold that this priest have, you know, and then I designed, you know, two new crowns. I had to pass through different, you know, views by all the priests for theological issues and stuff like that. And so we melted a very small part of this gold, you know, and we created these two new crowns, you know, and now, I don't know, they use them, I don't know, I think in August they were there, you know, and I'm very proud because I have to tell you something that is in a certain way a secret. I asked the permission to put my name, Alberto Nardi, on the back of one of the crown, and they say, okay, why not? I mean, it's signed with my name, you know, and you know, as a Venetian, as a lover of the city, as not a good Christian, of course, but you know, it's something that you know, will remain, and you know, probably our purpose in life is to leave a small seed, you know, after us, you know, and I thought that was a very nice story to tell, and you know, unfortunately, I was not so good probably in promote as good as I could, you know, this fantastic story.
It's an amazing story and a wonderful thing for you to leave to the city. A great gift. Why did your family originally come to Venice? Was it because it was this great trading?
My grandfather was Florentine, was not Venetian, and he came here to fight during the First World War, you know, that was, as I said before, fight in this region against the Austrian. And at the end of the war, he met a girl, and you know, he fell in love with this girl. He came back to Florence, and then he said to his mama, I want to find this girl once again because I'm in love with her. And he found this girl that was living near the station of Venice, and he just decided to get married with her. And my grandmother, she was very Venetian, but she was very cold and tough, you know. And so she said to him, okay, we get married, but you have to come to live in Venice because I don't come to live in Florence. And this small story tell us a lot of things because, for a man of the end of, 19th century, moving from Florence to Venice is not so obvious, and as Metternich say, Italy was the country of the 100 capitals, it's not like England where you have London or France where you have Paris, Venice was divided, in so many different republics, small republics, so everybody is very proud to be Florentine, Bolognese, Milanese and Roman and Venetian, so seeing this man from Florence moving for love is something that it's very sweet after me.
And you've stayed here ever since. He was a designer.
A sort of a designer. So he opened the store in the second part of the 20s and it was doing, not high kind of jewels, of course, and but I have books of his sketches that are quite primitive but very beautiful. Throughout the years, I always discover, the fact of the beauty of the imperfection, he was not a professional designer. The sketches are not perfect, they are not so beautiful, but at the end they are not so boring, they are full of appeal and atmosphere. So he was a designer, he was a very charismatic man. I have book of dedications of people that really made the history of the last century, they write very nice notes about him.
When we were talking about the city inspiring designs, there is the one of the famous Venetian icons was the Moretti. This is quite a sort of challenging thing in the modern world, isn't it? So these, for people listening, can you describe what they are?
Well, it is a black figure, a head, and shoulders, often with a turban, and because very bejeweled. But the history of them is that they were not slaves. They were nobody really knows exactly what they were. But if you put it into the historic context of Venice, which we've already spoken about, Venice was a melting pot and a cultural crossroads. People weren't discriminated against in Venice. You'd be discriminated in Venice if they couldn't buy something from you. That's how the Venetians saw you. They saw new people as a new opportunity. They weren't bothered about your skin colour, your creed, or whatever. We have to remember that we are used to a multicultural society where people look different to us, dress different, might have a different skin colour. But go back 500 years, and it was only places like Venice where you would see such a myriad of difference. And to my mind, the simplest answer to what the Moretti are, they're a celebration, an evocation of difference. They're celebrating that difference in a way which would have been so strange to a traveller. And if you came to Venice 500 years ago, and you would see all this myriad of different races and religions and people dressed in lavish clothing, that might seem ostentatious to modern eyes. You might want to bring that back as a souvenir. So it's nothing to do with slavery, to my mind. It's a celebration of difference. And they weren't even African. They're Turkish figures, aren't they?
The word moretto, moros, in Spanish, for the Venetian, they were not just describing people from Africa. They were describing people with, dark skin. They could be Middle East figures, like Turkish, and they could be. So they were not a category that was discriminating, African or Turkish people. As we said many times during this conversation, Venice was a very free port. It was a melting pot of different cultures. We were very welcoming to everybody if was bringing business.
So has it been eradicated really from Venetian life now?
Once again, another paradox about Nardi, where I was, my grandfather, as I said before, was Florentine, was not Venetian. And he started to make and to design this Moretti, so we never said that we invented them, because these pieces, they go back, in the history of Venetian goldsmiths. But what happened is that throughout the years, the Moretti of Nardi, and especially the one that they have the signature G, that is Giulio, that was the first name of my grandfather, Nardi, they became the very famous one, I can say. And also when they passed through auction, everybody is searching for this G Nardi Moretti,
I just saw two at auction at Druitt's in England.
He became very famous for these pieces, So a non-Venetian became, the master of a very iconic Venetian object, And what I'm trying to do now is to give a new life to this kind of object, And then I decided, after a lot of meditation, to continue to make them, because this is something, is a patrimony that is linked with the history of Venice. So we don't have to stop in front of ignorance in a certain way. And as pointed out perfectly Stephen, you have to know history behind before. I don't like the word judging, but before saying something, I will be very silly from my side if I come to England and I start to say something about your history, without knowing anything at all, I study this issue for many years. I know that there is nothing against anybody, and I'm a very open-minded person, so I will not accept to discriminate anybody at all. But at the same time, the people must accept the fact that these pieces, they are very opposite of what most of the people think.
And how do you make them now?
What I like about us is the fact that we are independent jeweler. We are still jeweler. We produce what we sell. And I still use some of the old design of my grandfather and my father too, So I like to present them, with the old, layout of with the old techniques, because our artisans, they come from the old one that they were at the time of my father and grandfather, and so I still make them. What I did in the last couple of years is also to give a different version, especially for certain countries that they have this kind of issue, and is proposing them with an amber face, with an amber face. Amber was used by the time of my grandfather in the 50s. So, it's linked with our history. So the idea is to propose them with no ethnical issues, but just from an aesthetic point of view. So they are very beautiful pieces, and I call them the Venetian, And why the Venetian? Because the Venetian, they were merchant, and in most of the cases they were dressed are Turkish, in the old time. We have sketches of the Gravenbrock, that was a very important German sketcher, of the 16th century, where you have a lot of beautiful views of these Venetian merchants that were dressed as Oriental figures. So I think the word the Venetian I like a lot.
And actually the turquoise, the stone, really took its name from Turkish, because it was all the Turkish merchants and traders dealing in this blue stone. So that's how that got its name.
We have to say that, Venice is still an island, and so there is this social, attitude that was very democratic also in the old time. The Venetian, they were trying to do also, if it's possible, business together, they were using, the possibility of sharing, the risk of a boat, from different merchants. And if we compare the history of Venice with the history of Florence, for example, they were a similar city. I'm talking about the 16th century. The greatness of Venice was this aspect, because the Florentine people, they were very split, always fighting. And if we check, for example, if we see a palace in Florence, we are going to see that these family noble palaces, they looks like fortress, and the Venetian are completely the opposite, So this aspect of being in a certain way, all together, because we are part of an island, a tiny island, is something that is still, I mean, it's incredible to say now because we are linked to the countryside and we are talking about the modern and contemporary time, but it's still there. It's still in our blood.
And I guess it's a tiny island that, as we've just been discussing, has influenced the world globally through the gemstones, through the trade, and through these cultural objects that really are invested historically with a sense of Venice that you are still making, Alberto.
Yeah, I always say to my kids, that what gives me always passion in what I'm doing is the fact of trying or being, in a certain way, an ambassador of the beauty of the city. This is my goal, what I'm trying to be is to be an ambassador of the city and trying to give also a different view of the city from, the cheap, kitsch view that we are showing now during, this touristic invasion that we have in front of us. So, I mean, just showing, showing them, to young people that there could be a way. It could be a way of doing business, because, we are not, here just for, doing culture or social things, but we are here for selling items, but in a very elegant, in a very niche way, and trying also to make this cultural work that I said before, talking about, the Moretto or the mask collection.
We are in a small room of the main store to talk, and behind Alberto is the biggest safe with these turning wheels, and we're now going to open the safe and take some images of the jewels so I can show everybody on Instagram and YouTube as they listen to our talk that they can look at the jewels as well.
Thank you very much. it was a great pleasure and an honor, to talk about my city, first of all, and us, of course. I always say that, we have a small history, family history in a big history that is the big history of the city of Venice, and it is not easy to continue this sort of journey that we are doing, but we do with a lot of passion and love, in all the items that we are going to show you now.
Stephen, thank you very much for coming across from your apartment on the Grand Canal and sharing your view of Venice and the history.
Thank you. Just one sort of final word. I think whilst we all decry the diminishing of craftsmanship and artisans in Venice, those places that have survived, like Nardi, I think that makes them all the more precious. And Nardi, forgive me for saying, I know it will embarrass you, but Nardi is a very precious jewel in Venice's crown, and long may she reign.
Thank you very much. It's very appreciated.
Thank you both so much. Thank you for listening. For this and other episodes of If Jewels Could Talk, please go to our website, carolwoolton.com/podcasts. If you've enjoyed it, share it any way you can, and we love to have a rating and a comment. We're also on YouTube, and you can listen in to a couple of recent radio interviews I've done about the new book. Hooray! If Jewels Could Talk, the book is out now from all good bookstores and from Amazon, as described in the FT as the book from the hit podcast If Jewels Could Talk, and the South China Morning Post kindly put us as number 2 on their list of fashion podcasts that make you think. So join me again in 2 weeks for the next Jeweled Nugget. We are staying in Venice, and I'm visiting the island of Murano, and we're going to be talking to one of the best glassmakers who makes glass beads on Murano. You will come with me into her studio. You will probably be glad that you weren't there the day I recorded it, because the temperature reached nearly 40 degrees. It was hot, and then she lit her furnace and started melting glass. Join me then and hear all about it. And thank you for listening. Bye-bye. If Jewels Could Talk with Carol Woolton is produced by Natasha Cowan, music and editing by Tim Thornton, graphics by Scott Bentley, illustration by Jordi Labanda. You can find our sponsors at fullygemstones.com and me at carolwoolton.com.